Mrs. Coombs has seen things disappear into St. Bride's Bay and watched flying silver and orange balls pass her farm.
And then after that came the silver-suited man, which was the most terrifying experience of it all.
Where did he appear?
In my window, there were those people standing now. Excuse me. He was about 7 feet tall, and the width of the window, which is 3 feet wide, and he was there for about 2 hours.
In 1977, a quiet corner of Pembrokeshire in West Wales became the epicentre of a UFO frenzy known as the Broadhaven Triangle. What began with school children reporting a landed UFO in Broadhaven quickly escalated into a wave of bizarre encounters in the surrounding area. Among the most extraordinary were the experiences of the Coombs family at Ripperston Farm. Events so perplexing that they drew national media attention, prompted a secret Ministry of Defence inquiry, and were later chronicled in UFO journals and books. Pauline Coombs, wife and mother of 5 at Ripperston Farm, observed a great ball of incandescent light hanging motionless over a field near the coastal cliffs. After about 20 minutes, the fiery orb began swaying like a pendulum and then dropped out of sight behind the cliff. Pauline roused her husband Billy, who searched the cliff path in the freezing night, but found nothing. The next day, local newspapers were suddenly filled with reports of UFO sightings across South Wales. Billy remarked that some strange things were happening. He'd seen nigh on 50 frogmen below the cliff, unmarked army trucks, soldiers in camouflage, navy there too, building the same path beneath the water, which struck him as highly unusual. Although not directly at Ripperston Farm, this event set the stage for the Welsh Triangle flap. On this day, 14 children at Broadhaven Primary, just a few miles from Ripperston, claimed a cigar-shaped object landed near their playground, and some saw a silver-suited spaceman emerge. Their headmaster, initially sceptical, had them draw what they saw. The drawings were strikingly similar. The story made national news. Local reporter Hugh Turnbull of the Western Telegraph and ufologist Randall Jones-Pugh investigated, finding no physical traces except a bent telegraph pole nearby.
An investigation has begun into a claim that something strange came out of the skies and landed in the Welsh village of Broadhaven near Haverfordwest.
I know that 16 children saw it.
And did they all see the same thing, do you think?
There's a common core of similarity between all their descriptions. I got them to draw and write what they saw.
And do you believe it?
I believe that they saw something which is not common in the environment in which they saw it, but whether they've interpreted correctly, I wouldn't know.
How clearly did you see it?
Well, I couldn't see its face because it was too far away.
Oh, you say you saw a man as well, did you?
Yes.
Suddenly, this silver cigar-shaped object seemed to pop up from behind the bushes and trying to take off, then it disappeared again.
Pauline Coombs began witnessing strange lights regularly. Roughly once a month, she saw something unusual. On one occasion in this period, whilst driving her children home at night, Pauline's car was pursued by a fiery object shaped like a rugby football, about the size of a soccer ball, that paced the car. The glowing object nearly collided with the car and then shot over it at the last second. When Pauline thought it was gone, her son shouted that it had stopped, reversed direction, and was coming back towards them. She accelerated down the lane towards the farmhouse as the orange light paced alongside. Suddenly the car's headlights dimmed and the engine died just as they reached home. Pauline and the terrified children abandoned the car and ran into the house, and soon after they found that electrical disturbances became commonplace. 2 of their television sets and 2 cars burnt out their wiring in succession. Light bulbs exploded and fuses blew repeatedly. The farm's electric meter would spin inexplicably fast even with everything turned off, as if some enormous energy drain was occurring. This is often cited as the pivotal incident. On a Friday night, Pauline and Billy Coombs settled in their living room to watch a late-night Western movie on television. Their normally calm dog, Blackie, became extremely agitated, sniffing and whining and pacing as if sensing something unseen. Around midnight, the TV began to flicker with interference. Pauline noticed a strange silvery glow outside the window that had been present for an hour. Suddenly, Billy, who had dozed off, was awakened by car-like lights shining through the window. He jumped up and saw a huge figure standing just outside. The couple froze in terror. This man-like figure was over 7 feet tall and was staring at them through the window, clad in a shimmering one-piece silver suit and helmet with a black rectangular visor instead of a face. A thick hose or pipe was seen coming from the helmet over its shoulder. As they watched in disbelief, the entity raised a gloved hand and placed it on the window glass, and the window pane began rattling violently, as if by an intense vibration. At that same moment, the lights in the house dimmed, and the television picture collapsed into static. Billy dashed to grab Blackie for protection, but found the dog cowering and whimpering in the hallway. The animal was so frightened it refused to go outside and instead bolted away in panic when forced out of the door. Desperate, Billy phoned a neighbour, farmhand Robert Morris, and then dialed 999 for the police. As the wail of the police car siren became audible approaching the farm, the silver spaceman vanished abruptly from the window. The police arrived to find the Coombs family in a state of shock and panic. Years later, one of the responding officers would recall that in all my 26 years of service, that was the most frightened family I have ever been to see. By the next morning, tangible evidence of the encounter was found. Beneath the living room window, the Coombs and police discovered large footprints in the soil, huge impressions, much larger than a human foot. A rose bush in the flower bed below the window had been scorched and burned. The story quickly leaked to the press, despite the Coombs' reluctance for publicity. Newspapers ran the sensational account of the 7-foot spaceman at the farmhouse window. The Western Mail and Western Telegraph reported on it, as did London tabloids, in tongue-in-cheek fashion, of course. One neighbour's similar sighting of a jelly mould-shaped UFO on her property was recounted alongside the Coombs story. This was Mrs. Julia Morrison, the neighbour who described seeing a domed object 15 feet high and 50 feet across, hovering in her garden for 10 minutes before silently ascending and flying away. Julia, notably a university graduate with double honours, insisted that she was not imagining things. Just days before the window incident, a striking event occurred across the bay, and Mrs. Rosa Granville, owner of the Havenfort Hotel, about 6 miles from Ripperston, awoke in the early hours to a strange, buzzing sound. Looking out, she was astonished to see a huge saucer-shaped thing with a dome on top sitting in a field behind her hotel, emitting multicoloured lights. She claimed intense heat emanated from the object, so much that her face felt burned. Even more unsettling, 2 tall humanoid figures emerged out of these flames around the glowing saucer, she said. They appeared to be faceless, just black spaces where faces should be, and they wore whitish boiler suit outfits. The beings spent several minutes walking around as if searching the ground and then re-entered the craft. The UFO then took off at tremendous speed, heading in the direction of Ripperston Farm. Mrs. Granville was deeply alarmed by the encounter and reported feeling physically affected by it. She wrote an urgent letter to her MP, Nicholas Edwards, describing what she had seen and asking for official answers. On the night of the 22nd or 23rd of April, Pauline Coombs learned of Rosa's sighting, and Rosa phoned Pauline to relay that on that very night she had seen again a glowing craft speed off in your direction across St. Bride's Bay. Introducing the Eerie's Vault Patreon page with several membership options, the first of which is Eerie's Entourage, where you'll get early access to some of the videos and of course your name listed in the video credits as a supporter of this growing channel. Eerie's Exceptionals will get the previous perks, plus exclusive on-location footage when it's available, occasional Patreon exclusive videos, access to clippings and research materials used in the creation of the Eerie's Vaults videos. And if you're an Eerie's expert, you will get all of the above, plus access to Eerie's Isles, an interactive Google Earth map with hundreds of sightings and event locations pinned, which will get updated regularly as the channel progresses. Head on over to Eerie's Vault at Patreon and discover a treasure trove of the uncanny, the paranormal, and the weird. 2 days after the window apparition, the Coombs' 10-year-old twin daughters, Leanne and Joanne, had their own close encounter. The girls were out playing in a field near the coastal cliffs, about half a mile from the farmhouse, with the family dogs in tow. Around mid-afternoon, Leanne noticed something moving by the hedgerow. "I saw something walking up to the hedge, quite near," she reported. About 50 feet away, a very tall, thin figure in a silvery suit was calmly walking across the field. Leanne described it as a silver human being. It had a head and body shaped like a person, but square, with a featureless black face, with no visible eyes, nose or ears. Its arms hung straight down at its sides as it moved. She shouted to her sister, "Can you see that thing?" And Joanne managed to glimpse the back of the metallic figure before it walked directly into a thick hedge and through a barbed wire fence without stopping. The dogs, which had been playfully scurrying through the grass moments before, suddenly raised their hackles, barking and growling in the direction of the silver figure. Rather than chase it, the dogs retreated, appearing frightened. The twins, though startled, were not afraid at that moment. They followed to a gate overlooking the next field, but they saw no sign of this intruder. The girls ran home and excitedly told their mother Pauline and their visiting grandmother just what they had seen. Skeptical, but of course concerned, Pauline gathered the twins and went back to the area immediately to investigate. In the spot where the entity had crossed, they found distinct tread marks in the long grass, a trail of flattened vegetation suggesting something or someone had indeed passed through there. However, no other evidence was found. Pauline spent an hour searching and peppering the girls with questions, and by the end she was convinced that her daughters truly had seen something highly unusual. That evening, investigators from the British UFO Research Association, including Randall Jones Pugh, arrived to examine the site. Pugh noted the top wire of the fence was embedded in a thick hawthorn hedge about waist high. No man could have walked through it, he observed. Weeks after the April excitement, Pauline Coombs herself purportedly saw a UFO on the ground. From her kitchen window one day, she spied a silvery disc-shaped craft about 400 to 500 yards away, resting on tripod-like landing legs in a field near the coast. The object was estimated at 40 to 20 feet in diameter and had an antenna or mast on top. Pauline was certain it was unlike any conventional farm machinery, and as a farmer's wife, she was quite familiar with all manner of vehicles and lights. After a short while, the craft took off and flew out towards the Atlantic Ocean. Investigating the field afterwards, the Coombs found a peculiar circular patch of burnt, flattened grass where the object had been. Not long after this, the Coombs children experienced something straight out of a science fiction film, because while playing near the shore, the children, this is the twins and their older siblings, witnessed 3 UFOs hovering in formation. The lowest of the 3 dropped a metal ladder or ramp, and a figure descended from the craft, briefly depositing a bright red glowing box-like object on the ground. The UFOs then flew off. The children raced to the spot, hoping to retrieve the mysterious red box, but found nothing. It had vanished. Strangely, by the next day the children developed unexplained red blotches or rashes on their arms and legs. These rashes resembled allergic reactions, but the kids had no history of allergies and often played in those same fields without any issues. The rash incident, combined with the accumulating high strangeness, left Pauline on edge. The family's farm life was being disrupted in numerous ways. Their herd of dairy cows began behaving very oddly. 2 particular fields where UFOs had been seen became off-limits to the cattle. The normally placid Frisian cows refused to graze in those pastures and would panic if forced in, causing milk yield to drop by about 15%. Mechanical failures continued. The Coombs went through 3 televisions and 3 cars in a matter of months, as each one inexplicably blew its wiring or circuitry after a sighting incident. Their electric bills skyrocketed for no clear reason. Family members also reported paranormal-seeming events. The Coombs' eldest son, Clinton, repeatedly heard a strange humming or droning noise outside the bathroom window that filled the whole room, but could never find its source. Objects around the house would go missing and reappear in odd places. Pauline's mother, who stayed with them sometimes during the turmoil, noted that small household items and sums of money would disappear and then turn up exactly where they had been left. This poltergeist-like activity added to the feeling that the family was under siege by forces unknown. An incident occurred suggesting the classic UFO lore of Men in Black visitations. One day in June, Pauline went off to a costume party, leaving teenager Clinton at home. That evening, a very peculiar vehicle arrived at Ripperston Farm. The strangest silver car Clinton had ever seen came up the drive, containing 2 men in dark suits. One man got out and approached the house. Clinton observed him through the window and felt an immediate sense of dread. He noted the man's odd appearance, waxy, pale skin, a high forehead, slicked back black hair, and those cold, unblinking eyes. As the figure reached the front door, Clinton was so unnerved that he refused to answer it. Next door, a family friend named Carol had been watching as well. She found it strange that the car made no sound on the gravel driveway. Going outside to her bin, she was startled to find the suited stranger suddenly standing right beside her, even though she had just seen him back at the farmhouse seconds before. To cover the distance between the 2 houses should have taken the man a few minutes, but he appeared to have instantaneously teleported. The man spoke politely, asking for Pauline by name. Carol told him that Mrs. Coombs was out and turned briefly toward her house, and in that moment the man vanished. Carol looked back towards Ripperston and saw, shockingly, that at the same instant the mysterious visitor was already back in his car, which was moving down the drive. When Pauline returned home, Carol immediately recounted the bizarre encounter, claiming, "You must have passed him on your way in." But Pauline had seen nobody on the road at all. Within days, Rosa Granville at the Haven Hotel phoned Pauline in a panic. The men had paid her hotel a visit as well. Rosa's college-aged daughter, Anna, had been minding the hotel when an enormous, shiny car arrived silently on their gravel drive. 2 men in black were in the car. One came to the door and inquired about Rosa's whereabouts, and then departed. When Rosa returned, she was confounded because we would have passed them on the road on our way back, she said, but we passed nobody. The men had seemingly vanished into thin air. Both Carol and Anna gave matching descriptions of the stranger, a tall man with unnaturally smooth, wax-like skin and an oddly stiff manner. This pair of incidents left the women extremely disturbed. The implication to the families was chilling. It seemed that unknown persons, or beings, knew exactly who had seen the UFOs and were seeking them out. By mid-June, pressure was mounting on authorities to respond to the West Wales UFO flap. Under public and political prodding, a secret investigation was indeed set in motion. On this date, the MOD's Under-Secretary of State for Defence, Mr James Wellbeloved, replied to MP Nicholas Edwards regarding Mrs Granville's report. The official letter stated blandly that the ministry had investigated the report and regret to say that, however, although an RAF officer had visited Mrs Granville, we are unable to offer any further information. It noted that a Royal Observer Corps post was in the vicinity, but claimed we have no record of any other unusual activity in the area. The letter essentially dismissed the case, saying there was no evidence anything odd had occurred. A reply later described as astonishing, given the hundreds of witness reports flooding in at the time. Behind the scenes, however, a confidential memo from the head of the MOD's UFO desk had requested the RAF's Provost and Security Service to conduct a discreet enquiry in the area. After the flurry of encounters in spring, the Coombs family experienced a merciful quiet period in the summer. July and August passed without incident, and life at Ripperston Farm almost returned to normal. Pauline even took a job at a local factory for 2 months, during which no new phenomena were reported on the farm. The family dared to hope that their nightmare was over. The respite was short-lived. By early autumn, strange events resumed with a new character. One day, teenage son Kieran was driving a tractor on the farm when a lady in white suddenly appeared and ran in front of his tractor, as if deliberately trying to be hit. Kieran braked in alarm, thinking that he'd struck her, but on searching, he found no person and no sign that anyone had been there. The apparition simply vanished. This spooked the family, raising the question of whether ghost-like phenomena were now involved, in addition to aliens. Then, the farm's cattle began to vanish and reappear in impossible ways. On 3 occasions, Billy found that his entire herd of roughly 120 cows had disappeared from padlocked fields or locked barns, only to turn up minutes later on a neighbouring farm or in a different field in an agitated state. In one dramatic incident around midnight, Billy had secured 158 cows in the indoor milking shed and walked to the house for a cup of tea. Within under 1 minute, he got a phone call from a neighbour a mile away complaining that his cows were eating his crops. Stunned, Billy rushed back to find the shed empty and all the gates still bolted. However, somehow the entire herd had translocated out of a locked enclosure and traversed a mile of hedges and fields almost instantaneously. The Coombs had to round up the wandering cattle in the middle of the night. Sometimes individual cows were found inexplicably in the wrong stalls or were missing entirely. By the end of the year, 3 cows had vanished permanently without a trace. One evening in September, Kieran arrived home early from field work, visibly shaken. He told his father that he had approached the farmhouse but didn't go in because he saw a tall, dark, fluid-like shape moving about inside their living room. Through the window he observed this amorphous, shadowy figure glide across the room. It unsettled him so much that he waited outside until other people came home. That same night, when the family tried to watch television after dinner, the television refused to work, a sign they felt that whatever it was back. Indeed, it seemed that the new wave of activity had begun, blending classic UFO phenomena with poltergeist-like occurrences. The culmination of the Ripperston saga occurred in late October. Pauline Coombs and several of the children were driving back from visiting relatives in Broadhaven on a clear Sunday afternoon. Her mother was also in the car, and about 3 p.m. they noticed a whitish disc-like object moving in the sky above their car, heading towards the sea. Curious and determined, Pauline decided to follow it. They drove towards the coast and then on foot crossed 2 fields to reach the cliff's edge. Just offshore stood a dramatic outcrop of rock known as the Stack Rocks. The UFO itself was no longer visible, but what the family witnessed next was absolutely astonishing. On top of the stacked rocks were two towering humanoid figures in silver suits. These beings were enormous, estimates ranging from 8 feet to 12 feet tall. They moved with purpose on the rocky platform. Their attire resembled silvery one-piece divers' suits, and their heads were disproportionately large, rectangular in shape, rounded at the corners with no visible facial features. The family watched in disbelief as one of the giants stooped, as if picking something up from the rock. Then they noticed something even weirder. A door, or an opening, became visible in the rock face of the sea stack. It slid open, like an elevator door or dumbwaiter, revealing a dark interior. One of the silver beings entered this door and disappeared from view, apparently descending inside the rock, and then re-emerged a short time later. The other figure then proceeded to walk across the surface of the water. It moved from the base of one rock across a small sea inlet to the next, gliding just above the waves, and then vanished behind the far side of the stack. After a few minutes, the first figure re-entered the mysterious doorway. Then both the figures and the door itself simply faded from sight. This entire display lasted about 15 minutes, whilst the Coombs family stood there, awestruck. Pauline and the children returned home, deeply shaken, and pondering if they could even trust their own eyes. In a startling coincidence, Rosa Granville was watching the same area through binoculars at the same time. Later that day, she phoned Pauline to report that she too had seen something at Stack Rocks. Rosa claimed a silvery UFO had flown into an opening in the rocks, and that silver-suited figures were visible moving about, climbing down to the water and back up into the rock multiple times. Her independent account matched the Coombs experience detail for detail, providing corroboration from another vantage point. This dual witnessing of what appeared to be an underwater alien base at Stack's Rocks became the dramatic climax of the Welsh Triangle saga. For several weeks after the Stack Rocks incident, minor odd events continued, but nothing topped that spectacle. Finally, on the night of the 19th of December, the Coombs family had what they believe was a farewell visit. Driving home to Ripperston from Broadhaven in the dark, they once more saw a bright yellowish-orange light streaking across the sky in the distance. As they neared the farm, the glowing object dropped to treetop height near their property, moving unnaturally and stopping in mid-air. The family parked and got out of the car, and sure enough, hovering directly over their cowshed was an enormous sphere of orange light. This time, instead of panic, the Coombs felt almost a sense of resignation or calm. Pauline marvelled aloud at how beautiful the orb looked and said, "Watch." At that very moment, the light began to swing like a pendulum. Then it halted, and suddenly it shot straight upwards into the night sky. In an instant, it was gone. Pauline later said she sensed that it would not be back. Indeed, from that point on, the bizarre events at Ripperston Farm stopped completely. The year-long ordeal was over, and by early 1978 the Coombs family moved away from the farm, eager to leave behind the memories of that harrowing year. A striking aspect of the Ripperston Farm case is the consistency and detail of the eyewitness accounts provided by the Coombs family and others. Pauline was the first to witness the unusual light in 1977 and went on to have multiple encounters. She described the initial UFO as a bright orb that started to move gently at first, swinging side to side like a pendulum before dropping from the sky. On the night of the 7-foot entity at the window, Pauline stood transfixed in terror. She recalled the figure's face area as just blackness, watching, waiting, and its hand pressed on the glass, which shook violently. After that scare, Pauline began suffering unexplained health effects. One morning she awoke with her eyes swollen and inflamed, as if severely sleep-deprived, and her right arm was in agony. This followed a night when she saw a glowing apparition on the lawn that vanished like a light switching off. Chillingly, Pauline's young daughter, staying at her grandma's at that time, dreamt of a glowing disembodied hand floating into Pauline's bedroom and touching her mother's arm that same night. Pauline's arm indeed had a painful mark. These incidents left her deeply shaken. Not the children too, she thought in despair, when even her twins developed rashes after a sighting. By summer, Pauline was begging to leave the farm, fearing for her family's safety. However, she also showed remarkable courage. For example, when her twins reported a landed saucer in the field, Pauline grabbed a coat and strode off determinedly towards the site, with the children insisting that they find the truth. Billy Coombs was a practical dairy farmer, and he was initially sceptical of his wife's lights in the sky. He famously chuckled after Pauline's January sighting that it was probably nothing, though he did note the curious military activity by the cliffs the next day. Billy's attitude changed on the 22nd of April when he saw the gigantic spaceman for himself. Billy's first instinct was to protect his family. He tried to sick their dog on the intruder and then immediately called the police. According to later reports, Billy was white with fear when officers arrived and remained shaken for days. Nonetheless, he remained level-headed in recounting events. He emphasised the impossibility of the cattle incidents. He told reporters there was no way his cows could have escaped and relocated so quickly on their own. He also provided a vivid account of the Stack Rocks giants. Along with the family, he witnessed the doorway in the rock and the towering silver figures. He confirmed that one being glided across the cove's water surface. They seemed to glide across to the other side of the inlet, he said, which to a farmer, and to anyone, defied all normal explanation. Billy began to ponder why his family was targeted. He shared with UFO researchers that some had theorized one of your family could be psychic, attracting the phenomena. Billy noted that Pauline was the first to see the UFO and the figure, so perhaps she had some latent sensitivity. By the end, he was simply relieved that the events had stopped and wanted to move on. Leanne and Joanne Coombs, the twins, provided remarkably clear and independent accounts of the 15th of May entity encounter. In interviews, some conducted years later, Leanne describes the entity in the field in detail. It was like a normal person, but square, she said, meaning the head or helmet had an angular shape. She insisted that it did have a face area, but no eyes, ears or nose were visible. It was very tall and thin, a silver human being that walked slowly with his arms straight down. Joanne only caught a glimpse of its back as it went through the hedge. Leanne recalled the dog's reaction. Their hair was up and they were barking and growling, which was unusual because the dogs had been happily playing moments before. Neither girl was frightened. At the time, they were more curious and excited. Leanne even laughed that she shouted to her sister in that moment, "Can you see that thing?" in a most playful way. But when they showed their mother the spot, the reality sank in. Then the twins became unnerved. Clinton Coombs. Clinton's direct testimony is less recorded in print, but we know he experienced the hum and the men in black. He told investigator Brian Richards that when the shiny car came up the drive, he sensed something was wrong. Seeing the man approach with an eerie demeanour, Clinton said he felt something was bad and refused to open the door. He later described the visitor's appearance, the waxy skin, the slicked back hair, details that matched Carol's description next door, of course. Rosa Granville. Her testimony is one of the most dramatic on record, and she gave it both in writing to her MP and in interviews. She described the object behind her hotel as an upside-down saucer that glowed with light and heat. She said there were flames of all colours coming from it, and from those flames emerged two humanoid figures. They didn't seem to have faces, just black spaces, she said. So let's look at the behaviour of the beings. Their behaviour ranged from passive observation, the window figure simply watched the Coombs until interrupted, to apparently systematic activity, with the Stack Rocks giants seeming to be retrieving or measuring something at the rock base. They displayed no clear hostility. There were no attacks on people, and indeed when confronted by flashlights or approaching police, they retreated or vanished. They did instill intense fear. Animals reacted strongly. The Coombs dog was terrified to the point of abnormal behaviour. Eventually, it had to be euthanized due to a lasting condition, classed as a type of dementia. It was continuously howling and snarling and chasing invisible things after its exposure. Cows panicked and avoided areas where beings or craft had landed. Physical effects on humans included eye irritation, with Pauline's swollen eyes for 3 weeks after seeing the glowing figure, skin rashes on the children, and possibly psychological trauma with nightmares and constant anxiety. Mrs. Granville's face felt sunburns after her sighting, and electromagnetic interference accompanied the humanoids. Care engines died and TVs blew up. These are classic EM effects noted in a lot of UFO cases. A little more corroboration, perhaps, in a letter published years later in the South Wales Echo, where an unnamed contributor recalled that Pauline was actually diagnosed officially with radiation sickness. The letter claims that the source was a nurse who had worked on the ward. If it's true, it raises a disturbing possibility that some part of what descended into that Pembrokeshire field was not just mysterious, but also hazardous. And if this episode was real, and Pauline was quietly treated, how many others like it went unrecorded, unspoken, and unnoticed? The Ripperston Farm incident unfolded under an intense media spotlight. Both local newspapers and the national press provided extensive coverage, often with catchy headlines and varying degrees of credulity. The Western Telegraph, this weekly Pembrokeshire paper, was among the first on the scene. Reporter Hugh Turnbull covered the initial Broadhaven school sighting early in February 1977. A now iconic photograph shows the Broadhaven children holding up their drawings of the UFO. Turnbull's articles treated the witnesses seriously. He famously rebutted a theory that the kids saw a sewage tanker, noting, "These children are from a farming background. They know what a tanker looks like." Turnbull later told researcher David Clark that his pet theory was something military behind the sightings. The South Wales Echo and Western Mail, these regional dailies, also picked up the story, with the Western Mail in particular revisiting the case years later in '96. The Western Mail published a piece when a local man, Glyn Edwards, confessed to perpetrating a hoax. A bit more on that later, but in 1977 the Western Mail ran reports on the West Wales UFO mystery and quoted military sources. Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic, as Arthur C. Clarke once said, and the Ripperston Farm UFO incident, with its blend of the technological and the seemingly magical, sits squarely at the intersection of these realms. In analysing this case, we should really adopt an open-minded curiosity, tempered by some scientific scepticism. On one hand, the sheer volume of testimony and the detail in the Ripperston case is impressive. We've got multiple independent witnesses, physical traces reported, and the emotional impact on witnesses was profound and evident. It would be extraordinary for multiple people to hallucinate the same 7-foot-tall being, or for children to invent complex saucer landings in tandem with adults reporting the same thing. The consistency, like almost every account of the humanoid mentions the black, featureless face visor thing, it suggests a real stimulus behind the sightings. But on the other hand, there are glaring red flags. The events often escalated when the media and public attention escalated too. A sceptical viewpoint is that initial genuine UFO sightings created a buzz, and some individuals might have hoaxed later incidents for fun or even profit. Indeed, a confessed hoaxer, Glyn Edwards, admitted he took a stroll in a silver suit for a bit of fun during the flap, which correlates with the MOD's suspicion of pranksters. If one or two key encounters were hoaxes, then that could have amplified the mythos and influenced perceptions of later events. The presence of elements akin to poltergeists or ghosts introduces the possibility of misinterpretation or perhaps some psychological factors. Could the Coombs high stress and suggestion have led to some collective sort of misperception? You know, people in a frightened state seeing things like a car light coming through a window and misconstruing it as a 7-foot-tall humanoid. Yes, I know it's a stretch, isn't it? But fear can affect your perception. Crucially, despite exhaustive investigation, there's no clear photographic or hard physical evidence emerging. No captured photo of a craft or beings, and even though some events happened in daylight, there's still no pictures. Of course, this was in 1977 in rural Wales. Cameras were not ubiquitous by any means, but the lack of tangible proof means we've got to rely just on testimony, doesn't it? There are several hypotheses, aren't there? So, extraterrestrial visitation. The classic interpretation. Alien beings in advanced spacecraft were surveilling the Welsh countryside, possibly using an undersea base as a staging ground. Proponents of this theory point to the structured craft, the being's uniform appearance and technology, with the craft on tripod legs and the door in the rock, as evidence of non-human intelligence. If it's true, Ripperston might represent one of the most direct close encounters on record. But why Wales? Why engage in bizarre activities like dropping a red box or teleport cows? The absurdity of some of the actions makes this both an exciting and perplexing theory. It's not impossible, but of course, extraordinary claims and all that. Some have suggested a variant here, maybe a secret military experiment. Could all of this been a clandestine testing of psychological warfare, of new tech by the MOD or even NATO? Given the RAF bases, perhaps holographic projections or helicopter-borne dummies. It's speculative, of course. It's got no supporting documentation, just like the rest of it. The sceptical explanation consolidates that at least some of the dramatic incidents were hoaxes, and that initial genuine UFO reports of lights were embellished in the retelling due to social contagion. The fact that a hoaxer came forward lends some credence. If two young men indeed wandered around in refinery suits, they could explain the core humanoid sightings at Ripperston and Little Haven. From a scientific perspective, no definitive data were collected in 77. There was no radiation readings taken at burn sites, to my knowledge. No forensic analysis of footprints, no casts made, for example. Electrical interference reports are intriguing. If one assumes those are true, then they hint at an electromagnetic field source, but replication or measurement was impossible. I might note that if an advanced craft was present, one might expect a radar track or something. Interestingly, RAF Brodie's radar reportedly picked up nothing unusual, despite being operational. However, small low-altitude objects or electrically stealthy things could evade a 70s radar. The accounts of the teleporting cows, of course, sound like the cattle mutilation angle, don't they? Bizarre animal disturbances that are associated with UFOs. While science can't explain instant translocation of matter, you might look for normal causes. Were the gates really locked? Could someone have driven the cows out as a prank? Take a lot of effort though, wouldn't it? The box, or the glowing red cube, seen by the Coombs children briefly, burned itself into memory bright, geometric and strangely fluorescent, as though lit from within by something that wasn't quite electricity as such. Later the children developed skin blotches and they approached the place where the cube had been. There was no heat, no residue, but there was perhaps a field, invisible, ionizing or strange. What was the red box? Was it an energy field emitter? Was it a scanner? What would be the reason of dropping this thing into the grass only for it to disappear? Is it a beacon? A location marker? Is it some sort of communication device? Who knows? And what about the ladder? The ladder gets me. Why a ladder? Why would a being that commands gravity need steps? Why not just phase through the hull or beam yourself down like fiction tells us we can? What if it wasn't a ladder? Perhaps the kids' minds saw something familiar and described it accordingly. It could have been some sort of scaffolding. But that's really just another ladder, isn't it? What if it was a limb or a weird beam of some description that the kids just thought was a ladder? Why would, if the being is an extraterrestrial being and would assumedly have command of advanced technology, why would they still be using ladders? Then there was one other object that caught my attention, that when the craft left for the final time, apparently something fell to the ground. Again, nothing was found. But it wasn't described as a red cube like the other thing was. So, what was it? Again, sensor, beacon, biological marker. Did they just flush the toilet as they left? What was it? That bugs me. And whatever the truth, it's this tension between the mundane and the miraculous that marks the Ripperston case as something pretty rare. A story where nothing quite fits, but nothing seems to have been invented. In the end, we're just left with questions, aren't we? Why a ladder? Why the cows? What was the thing that fell to the ground? And what was the red box? The beings, did they behave like sentient beings by the sound of it, or rather like machines? Were they robots? Were they automatons? Their movements were deliberate. Were they programmed? They didn't seem curious. Could they have been biomechanical observers, scout drones, or empty suits even? Perhaps the only piece of curiosity was the act of looking through the window, but without a face. How do we know that what the thing was looking through, from the thing's perspective, was a window in the first place? And why was there no abduction attempt? Are we talking some non-contact protocol? Because if we are, they messed up. Again and again, the events seem to return, for me, to one person. Pauline. She was the first to see the light, the first to face the being. Her eyes swelled shut after the encounter. Her electrical devices failed. Was she unlucky? Or was she the intended subject of some sort of experiment? I wonder if stacked rocks were ever scanned with a sonar or checked for subterranean anomalies. That'd be interesting to do, wouldn't it? Why did the visits end so suddenly? Why did none of the beings communicate? Why did that red cube vanish? Why did they come? And what did they take with them? The first step to understanding something is to ask the right questions, and at Ripperston Farm, perhaps the real mystery is not in what was seen, but in what we failed to ask over the years. It presents a fascinating story, with many witnesses and traces, yet none of it's conclusive. Of course, I emphasise the importance of keeping an open mind. Either we witnessed an alien survey in 1977, complete with its own cosmic pranksters, or we are seeing the intricate workings of the human imagination under stress, or maybe a bit of both. But until further evidence arises, the Ripperston mystery stands tantalising and unsolved. Of course, the confession of Glyn Edwards provides a partial resolution. Clearly some sightings were man-made hoaxes. But does that explain the core of the Coombs experience? Skeptics might say that once the idea of a silver spaceman was seeded, the Coombs might have been on a hair trigger to interpret any odd stimulus as the return of the spaceman. Psychological suggestion can be powerful. Maybe the twins' rash was just nettles, but given the UFO context it became significant to them. Conversely, others would point out that the Coombs were not prone to fantasy and had nothing to gain. In fact, they didn't want the publicity. In the years prior to the Coombs moving to the farm, other things were happening in the area. So in Milford Haven in 1965, this is about 7 miles from Ripperston, multiple residents reported seeing a large metallic object pass silently over the town. It was described as cigar-shaped, dull grey, and roughly the length of a commercial airliner. It moved slowly, emitted no sound, and was visible for almost a full minute. Stacked rocks, where the giants were seen. In the early 70s, walkers along the coast near Stacked Rocks reported seeing a glowing orange light hovering low over the water. The object was stationary for a time and then rose vertically and vanished. Some accounts describe a faint hum or droning sound. Broadhaven, 1972, several farmers and children in the Broadhaven area reported lights descending into nearby fields. In at least one account, a tall, silver-suited figure was seen standing motionless near livestock. St Ishmael's and Brawdy coastline in the mid-70s. and there were unconfirmed reports of military personnel seen conducting unannounced activity along the cliffs near St. Ishmael's. Civilians described seeing unmarked trucks and soldiers in camouflage accompanied by frogmen. No exercises were formally announced, and the Ministry of Defence did not comment. Each of these events occurred within a 7-mile radius of Ripperston Farm and took place well before the Coombs incident. In the grand scheme, Ripperston Farm made its mark on Pembrokeshire. Even today, tour guides in West Wales mention the time aliens invaded in 77, and locals half-jokingly call it Wales's own Skinwalker Ranch. The simplest explanation is that a combination of misidentified natural phenomena, pranks, and psychological suggestion produced the Welsh Triangle saga. No aliens or supernatural forces are needed to explain it, just the quirks of human perception and behaviour. Yet, even if one, single one, of the Ripperston encounters was real, in the sense of an unknown intelligence at work, then it represents a brush with something profoundly beyond our understanding. The image of colossal silver figures vanishing into a seaside cliff is like science fiction, but many respected people swear it happened. If true, perhaps one day we will discover evidence. The Ripperston Farm incident will remain a mystery until then. The rationalist in me sees coincidences and capers, but the explorer in me cannot entirely dismiss the quietly spoken farmers and the wide-eyed children who insist, even decades on, that they witnessed the inexplicable. Until we have definitive proof one way or the other, the case remains open. A reminder that not all phenomena have yet yielded to scientific explanation, and that sometimes truth and the strange might be the same thing.